I just thought that I'd talk with you all a little bit today about the ideas behind design thinking, how we approach design thinking in the lower school. It's been a little bit of a trendy buzzword lately, and so I want to kind of demystify it and talk about how we incorporate it into our own philosophy and really make it ours at Shorecrest. So what I have for you on this slide is the design thinking definition that the lower school faculty came up with as part of a professional development work that we're doing throughout this year with an organization called MindSpark. We all sat down and we said, okay, what does this really mean for us here? Okay, so we're not going to steal anybody else's definition. So this is what we came up with. Design thinking is a collaborative process used to solve real-world problems. Students work through stages that encourage empathy, risk-taking, creativity, and critical thinking. And then through trial and error, students ideate, prototype, test, and reflect on their solutions. So we really wanted to emphasize three things. One is that this is real world. We know that learning needs to be empowering. We know that learning needs to feel authentic and real to kids. So we want to make sure that when we're doing design thinking with children that it's truly real world, that it's meaningful. We wanted to emphasize empathy. One of the biggest concerns we have as educators right now is how do we foster care for our planet, care for our community, care for each other and our small community within the classroom. How does that actually happen? Because what we know now is that empathy is something that is taught and learned, not something that's necessarily intrinsic. There are studies that show, for example, that babies will prefer puppets that are kind to other puppets over puppets that are mean to other puppets. So we do have an innate recognition that kind is better than unkind, right? But for us, that's really more our lizard brain that's saying this person is safe. But how do you foster feeling with somebody? How do you foster that ability to see how somebody is feeling and to really join them in that feeling? And so that's what we're working on with design thinking. And then finally, this idea that you're going to have error when you try something. And how do you work through that and not let yourself get stuck? So those are the three pieces that we're really, really focused on in the lower school. So before I go into the steps of design thinking or what it looks like very specifically in the classroom, I wanted to give you a chance to try it. So there is a very well-known and often done challenge in the design thinking world called the 5 chairs challenge. We're only going to do 2 chairs today because we're going to do it quickly. So the 5 chairs challenge is you're presented with a person who needs a chair. And you have your person in front of you, and I'll tell you what to do with them in a moment. We ask students to read the profile of the person and really think about what does this person need. This is where the empathy comes in. Can you feel with this person enough to create a chair that works for them? And then we have them go through 5 stages of developing and prototyping that chair. Drawing the chair, constructing it with cardboard, constructing it with paper, glue, and tape, and other connective materials, constructing it with clay, constructing it with pipe cleaners. So thinking about the different ways that different materials enable us to prototype better, worse, right? How do we use materials effectively? So we're just going to try it really quickly. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to read your profile and use whatever utensil you want to sketch out a chair for this person. Before we go to construct our chairs with our pipe cleaners, we're going to get some feedback, okay? Because one of the most important things about the design thinking process is talking with other people and hearing their thoughts on our ideas and hearing their ideas and using components of those ideas to create something even better than we could create ourselves. So if you're already working with somebody, great, continue doing so. Kind of think about your design and how you might construct it in a chair. If you were working by yourself, turn to somebody else and kind of share who your person is and why you created that chair. So about 5 minutes to share with somebody. Right.
I'm really.
For good conversation. We're moving through this much faster than we normally would, just to give you the idea. Now let's give it a go, because another piece of design thinking is using materials in a way that is you're not judgmental to yourself, right? So you are going to now construct your chair. You can do it in partners or by yourself, whatever works best for you, out of the pipe cleaners to give it some three-dimensionality. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask a couple people to share by telling me about the person that you are constructing this chair for, and then showing us the chair that you constructed for them, and tell us how the chair meets their needs. So who might like to share their chair?
Are we happy to share?
We're happy to.
We've got one here and one there. We'll start over here and then go back
gracious.
there. All right. Would you
All right.
like me to lift it up? So
No, it doesn't. It has parts. It has
so tell us
parts.
about the
I don't know
person
if
you're
you're
designing
I don't know if you're
for.
insured to lift it up.
Yeah, I was gonna say. All right, so ours is a grandpa who's achy, needs medication, has trouble getting around, and needs help getting up and down.
Okay.
So here's the mechanism underneath that lifts the chair, basically standing and then sits, so they don't actually have to move. This is the air circulator at the bottom, so they don't get bed sores from sitting too long. There's the remote and the medication holder,
Medication holder, drink holder.
head cushion, and footrest that goes up.
Wow. Nice.
Wow.
Grandpa's gonna be so pleased. Thank you for sharing. So you heard all of the parts of what he needed and thought about a solution for all of them. Well done.
So I have a 1 year, it's just basically a feeding place for a 1-year-old. The stated problems are during feeding, gets whiny and squirmy. The unstated but obvious need is one of safety. So solving for how to prevent whining, how to secure and to secure Cheerios and sippy cups. So I thought about the thing that all kids have that kind of go in when they're learning to walk, that they now found out they shouldn't use because it's actually bad for their hips. So take the wheels off of that device. So instead of allowing movement across, there's movement that this rotates within it. The food is somewhat elevated at its front that they can look at. So,
So she can move
Yeah,
around,
a
but
little-
she can still
a little
access
bit-
her things, and
little
she
bit
can be
movement.
independent.
Yeah.
Hey, well, ours is for Emil. He is an astronaut. So, when he's in the space station, he's in this weightless environment. So we really needed to find something that would kind of encapsulate him. A nice kind of cocoon-like chair suspended from the space station. We do have a 5-point harness that he can go ahead and strap in, and spot for his boots to just kind of slide in so they don't wander around. So, and it kind of dangles and moves, so it works really well in the space station.
One thing that we might do with a challenge like that is bring in a baby, bring in an astronaut, right? And have the students interview that person to really learn more about them, and the face-to-face connection is so important. So the design thinking process traditionally has 5 steps. We empathize, we define, ideate, prototype, test. In the empathize stage, it's just what you all practice. Learn more about the person that we're designing for. This process was really originated in Silicon Valley with this, movement to design products for an end user, right? So it originated out of kind of a business setting, really, but it's been adapted to the educational setting with less of an emphasis on product and more of an emphasis on problem solving. So we begin by empathizing. What do people need? And then we define the problem, because the problem isn't always obvious right away, right? And usually we have some kind of problem statement, right? Neil the astronaut needs a comfortable place to sit in the space station. And we think about, okay, what is that environment like for him? And then we define the problem around his needs. We ideate. We come up with wild ideas. Okay? We try to untether ourselves from existing solutions and come up with a number of ways that this problem could be solved. Then we prototype, we build something. We try to use a number of different materials because some materials are more suitable for some problems than other materials. Sometimes just the fact of using a different type of material will make us think of something new that we could incorporate into our solution. And then we test. Testing can look a couple different ways. Sometimes we build a working prototype and we can see if it actually works. Sometimes we build a prototype that's more of a model that isn't necessarily working, but we can bring that model to our end user or to our person with the problem and say, what do you like about this? What do you wish were different? What doesn't make sense to you? What do you wonder? Then we can go back and we can improve our prototype or create a new prototype. So those are the overall steps of the design thinking process. 2 steps have recently been added that make the process more reflective. There's the notice step, right? So not always is a problem brought to you. Sometimes you're paying attention and you're looking for an opportunity to problem solve. So one of the goals of the design thinking process is to help students simply become more aware, right? When you're out in the world, do you notice when there's a problem? So the notice step kind of predicates everything else that comes after. And then we've also added the reflect at the end. Understanding that learning is a reflective process. And we need to spend some time really thinking about what was this process like for me? What was this process like for the person that I was designing for? What did I learn about myself as a learner through this process? And what did I learn about how to learn? So we make sure that students have time to reflect. That's in writing, it's in speaking, it's in the portfolios that we maintain for our project work throughout their lower school experience. So when we are doing design thinking in the lower school, we are doing it not as much to create a thing, a chair made out of pipe cleaners, right, a cardboard, creation of some kind or another. It's not really about the prototype that we create. It's about the mindsets that we're developing. And I've been really harping on empathy because this is the piece that's been very, very important for us as a lower school, both in the responsive classroom work that we've been doing for years, in our project work, and now in the design thinking work that we're beginning to explore a little more deeply. If you've ever read any of Brene Brown's books, she's very famous right now. She actually writes a lot about guilt and shame and what they do to us as people and how they make us act. It's a lot more interesting and uplifting reading than it sounds like the way that I described it. But she has this wonderful quote, it's hard to hate up close, so move in, right? Once you get to know somebody, you automatically begin to develop more empathy for them. And so I really like that quote from her. And when we're exploring real world problems, we're trying to understand how somebody else might feel, what their perspective is, and the best way to do that is to talk with them, to interview them. One of our lower school teachers, Mr. Zamoff, if you know him, he teaches Spanish. Last year, he brought some migrant workers in for the students to interview because they've been talking a lot about migrant workers and the Latino community. And he thought, these kids, they can't get it unless they sit down with somebody and that person tells them their story. So although that wasn't a design thinking project, I really like how it illustrates the idea of empathy, the idea that if you're going to be talking about a problem, it helps to sit down in front of the person that's having that problem and hear their story. So when we do design thinking, we really focus on exploring real world problems. I'll talk about the 4th grade sustainability project in a moment, but that's another example. We've had students sit down with Sage and try to understand, why are we using styrofoam? It seems like a horrible thing for our environment, but maybe there's more to it that we don't understand, right? So can we sit down with the people who are providing it and try to understand their perspective and what they're trying to accomplish? And then again, the focus on serving others. We're a school that really prides ourselves on our commitment to service. All of you serve the school. We serve the school as a whole, serves their community, and all the way up through the upper school, students are engaging in acts of service, through Service Week that the upper school does, and their entire career in that division. So we want to develop that mindset right away, early on, where children notice when other people have needs, and their immediate question is, how could I help? So that's the first step and the first mindset that we're trying to develop. I want to show you really quickly, this is not our school, but it's a really neat way of approaching design thinking that I could see us doing as we do a community study. This is an example of one way you could approach it, right? Go out into your community, say, hey, what does the community need? And designing a community around the needs of the user. Actually, our first graders are engaged in a community study right now. And we were talking about how an interview process with members of the community can become part of our bigger inquiry on community. And I'm going to talk with you in a moment about how design thinking fits into project work. Because we are a project work school, but that doesn't mean that we can't use challenges and use components of design thinking to enhance our project work. So I'll talk about that in a minute. Other mindsets that design thinking encourages, grit is both kind of a buzzword, and some people roll their eyes a little bit when they hear it, but I still like it because I think the idea of persisting through challenges is a mindset that we want to develop in our students. So there are going to be times that your construction, your prototype simply doesn't work, right? And you're going to have to find a new material to use, maybe come up with a different way to solve your problem. And that's okay, and that's expected. So persisting through failure is an opportunity, persisting through challenges, and risk-taking, right? Being willing to try something that might not work. That's how all great ideas come to be. Questioning. Questions are more important than answers, and sometimes when I'm walking through the lower school and observing, I like to listen for questions. Are the students asking questions, and are they more than procedural, right? Are they more than, should we use, a pencil or a marker for this, activity? Is it, oh, I'm wondering if, or how might we, kinds of questions. I really have a great book that I recommend you read if you're looking for something. It's Warren Berger's A More Beautiful Question. And he goes through a number of different sectors of society, the arts, business, education, and talks about how we need to shift our focus from it's important for me to have the right answer to it's important for me to think about what questions to ask. I really recommend it. Excellent reading, very inspiring. This has been a shift that's occurred throughout my career. From teachers as the purveyors of knowledge up front of the class, kind of like I'm doing right now, to teachers as question coaches, right? Helping students form the kinds of questions that are going to get them to something greater than information that they can pull out of the internet. So, brainstorming and creativity. When we brainstorm, we have some rules. Defer judgment, right? Someone throws out an idea, that's an idea, and it's up there for us to look at. We're not going to say, oh, that would never work. We're not going to say, oh, that's better than Susie's idea. Here's an idea. Let's put it out there with all the rest of them. Be visual. Okay, so as much as you can sketch an idea, that really helps people to understand where you're coming from. Go for volume, lots of ideas. Build on the ideas of others. Always listening to each other in discussion, in brainstorming, and then encouraging wild ideas, because there's a nugget of reality in every wild idea that can kind of springboard you to something more exciting. When we prototype, sometimes we just prototype once, but true design thinking has us prototype again and again and continue getting feedback and improving our prototypes as we go along. An example of kind of an exercise that we do with students sometimes is the paperclip activity. How many uses can you come up for a paperclip? So actually just take a second to think about that. Picture a paperclip. Besides clipping paper, can anyone think of another use for a paperclip? Shout it out if you think one.
You can unbend it and use it as a little hook.
Okay, could be a hook.
You can make it a little keychain.
Keychain.
You can draw a perfect
Screwdriver.
circle. You can draw a perfect circle with it.
Oh, compass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can put a bunch of them together. and-
Chain.
Yeah.
Hang a wet
Sam?
swimsuit to dry.
What's that?
Hang a wet swimsuit to dry.
Swimsuit, wet swimsuit hanger.
Bracelet.
Bracelet. Can we get 3 more?
Hole punch.
Hole puncher.
Poke
Earring.
your brother.
Poke your younger brother.
Fixing 2 long pants.
Fixing 2 long pants. Pants hammer, right? We could go on and do this forever and our ideas will get wilder and wilder, and that's the idea behind the brainstorm. Collaboration. We believe that children learn, adults learn, by talking together and building on each other's ideas, right? So we need to learn to do that productively, right? And in a way that creates the kinds of thinking that we want to create. When we're working together in a design thinking project, we're usually working collaboratively, and so the end result is a result of everybody's contributions, right? And with young children, part of that is the social emotional work that goes into how do you really listen to each other, right? How do you honor each other's ideas even when maybe you disagree on what this should look like, right? How do you take an idea, really listen to it enough so that you can understand it and you can build on it? I promised you a couple of examples of what this looks like in practice. So I'm going to show you something from 2nd grade and something from 4th grade. Our 2nd graders are actually deep into their study right now of plants and pollinators. And one of the challenges that students do as a piece of this inquiry, so this is a project work inquiry where we go through the phases, much like the inquiries that your students, that you're familiar with, that your children have engaged in. And at this stage in the inquiry, they are deep into their research. So they are reading books, they're hearing from guest experts, they're going out on field experiences. And then one piece of this research is this design thinking challenge, and we call it Be a Bee. We give students tools, and we say, okay, your flower is over there, the pollen is over here. How are you going to create something to transport the pollen, it's glitter, to the flower, which is a piece of felt? Okay? And we give them a number of tools. Here you see students are working with, they've got some felt here and glitter, they've got some feathers, they've got some pipe cleaners, you know, the omnipresent tool that we use. And we say, okay, here's your team, here's your materials, go ahead and design, draw a couple of designs that might work, agree on what you think is the best design, construct it, test it, see how much glitter pollen you can get to your flower, and then think about, okay, what components worked, what components didn't work, and then redesign it. Right? And this is all within the context that we've been studying about bees and pollination and the importance of protecting the bees, so there's an environmental conservation piece to it as well. So this is a very, very quick design thinking. Design thinking can be one day. It can be one quick challenge. It can also be a long process. So it depends on what your goals ultimately are. Grade 4 does a much bigger design thinking project around sustainability. And they're deep into that study right now as well. These are our students from last year. They are given the challenge of, okay, we have these big problems of sustainability. These are some big global problems, okay? Think about which problem is most concerning to you, right? And then how might we solve that problem? So in this case, the end user, we have this reusable water bottle station. She interviewed some end users who said, I'm always forgetting my water bottle, right? I know it's not good to be buying those plastic ones and throwing them away. I know that's contributing to a lot of plastic waste. But my goodness, it's so much to carry, right? And so she designed a sling with a little water bottle holder. You tuck your little water bottle right in there, and you're never without it. And you no longer have that problem.
It takes 450 years to decompose. It takes 1,000 years to decompose this water bottle. I made this reusable water bottle holder, and you just stick your water bottle in it. It's easy to carry, and it's good for the environment.
Another problem that a user presented was that they're always forgetting their recyclable bags at home, right? So here we have a vending machine for the reusable grocery bags. And you put in 25 cents, you get your reusable grocery bag, and then you can bring it back and get your deposit back for your reusable grocery bag. So these are they workable prototypes? In some cases, yes, they are. That little sling actually worked as a water bottle holder. In other cases, they were more conceptual, right? But in both cases, they are showing students thinking about problems that people have, things that get in the way of us acting in a sustainable manner, and how might we solve that. This one was even more conceptual. It was a prototype for recycling styrofoam, I think that's what that was. So you've heard Lisa and I use a lot of terms over the years around our philosophy and our approach to learning. So I wanted to kind of break it down for you a little bit, how some of these different philosophies and approaches fit together. Right now, our alpha through our first grade is deep in a study of Reggio, Emilia. We're looking at the design thinking in 2nd through 4th grade. However, that's not a point of division. Design thinking is a process and a concept that you can do with anybody at any age. Sometimes you just do the pieces, maybe the empathy piece or the ideating piece. But we can do that with our kindergartners just as well as with our 4th graders. Same with Reggio Emilia. Reggio Emilia as a philosophy can go all the way up through 12th grade and beyond. So I don't mean to imply that there's a division there, but I just wanted to share with you that that's where we're really working right now. And then the project approach, which is how all of our children in the lower school approach their inquiry work, where they ask questions and they pursue the answers to those questions. So these are the 4 pieces that I pulled out that for me are true of all of these philosophies. The asking beautiful questions and the curiosity that comes with this kind of approach to learning. The emotional connection is so important. When we feel care for the people that we are studying with, for the topics that we are studying, we are going to be intrinsically motivated to learn those things and to work on those problems. So the emotional connection is so important. The social constructivism and collaboration, the working together to solve a problem, the working together to build on each other's ideas, and then the learning through doing. Learning has to be hands-on. You have to be involved in your learning in a way that is more than just cerebral in order for it to stick. And we talk a lot about learning that sticks and that transfers to new situations. And then I wrote down some things that are not necessarily different, but they're just different approaches to the same end goal, which is the learning. Reggio is really more of presenting materials to students and following their interests. It's much more emergent in that sense. It's much more about creating environments that support learning. The environment is the third teacher, right? What you see in the classroom is part of what influences your learning and your approach. The design thinking is a little bit more, I'm going to say, rigid in the sense that there are phases that you go through, and the goal is to create some kind of product or solution. And you're really focusing on an end user. So the design thinking is a little bit more kind of structured in that sense. And it's a lot more about the rapid prototyping, the iterating, the learning from failure, the trying it and trying it again until you come up with a workable solution. And then the project approach is learning how to learn. The project approach is research. I'm curious about this. Who could I ask? What books could I read? How can I examine this question that I have and come to a better, more deeper understanding of it, and then share that learning with others? So the project approach, and many of you have been to project shares in the lower school, we're producing some way of sharing our knowledge with others, whether we created a movie or a puppet show, we want to share that back out. So, a little bit different in each approach, but they do fit together. We'll do a project approach, a study that's a long study, maybe an 8-week study, And like with the plants and pollinators, there'll be a design thinking component to it that kind of helps us get to a quick solution within this bigger study. And then the concept of Reggio Emilia, the concept of documenting your learning so that the teacher can follow the interest of the student, so that the student can tell the story of their own learning. That's a piece of the project approach as well. So while there are kind of 3 different approaches or philosophies, they interweave. And one of the most important things that we need to do as educators is to have a deep understanding of how students learn, how these different philosophies and approaches support learning, and when it's appropriate to pull from each of them to create a learning experience that's going to be meaningful and long-lasting and transferable.
How do you evaluate this?
It's a great question. So it depends on what our goal is when we set out. One of the tools that we always use for evaluating is rubrics. So teachers always have rubrics when they go into project work, when they go into design thinking work, of what does this look like when a student is doing this well, and when they're engaged in this work deeply. What does that look like? And usually we share those rubrics with students. And in fact, in some cases, they help us to create them, right? So part of our evaluative process is rubrics, and as a teacher going through and saying, do I notice this student listening to what other students are saying and building on those ideas? Do I notice this student asking why questions, following up, right? Using that empathy piece to say, I hear that, grandpa, needs a chair that's comfortable, right? Why? I hear that he takes medication. I wonder what it's for. Is it his knees that are hurting? Is it his shoulders? So asking those questions, do I hear that? So a lot of it is observation, a lot of it is anecdotal, and then the end result, right? So what do students tell us about their learning at the end? That reflective piece is very important. When we're creating our portfolios that we post on Power School Learning, one of the things we ask students is, what did you learn through this process? What was this experience like for you? Can you reflect on, maybe you have a different idea now than you did at the beginning, and how did your ideas change? So student talk, and what we call accountable talk, is also part of how we evaluate.
Some of those ideas were amazing from the 4th grade. Wouldn't it be amazing if you could actually move it from a prototype into a business community or something for somebody to actually take and run with the project? Is there a way of...
That's
what 5th grade's going to start doing. 5th graders?
5th grade, so sure, that I'm not as up on the 5th grade plans, but Lisa and I had the great fortune last year visiting a school in California called Nueva that's been doing this work for as long as we've been doing project work. So they've really been engaged with it for a long time. And one of the things one of their classes do is they have an evening where business leaders in the community come to hear their presentations. And I don't know that any of their ideas necessarily become actual products, but the business leaders give them feedback as though they were going to buy, right, the company or the patent or whatever it is. And I agree with you. I think the more, what I said at the beginning about it being real world, the more that it can really be real world for these kids, that their ideas can be heard by people who take them seriously, and that adults and peers show interest in what they're doing and help them to move their ideas forward. That's really what we're going for. So I agree with you. Yeah.
If not fearing failure is integral to this and continued learning, how is that part of the curriculum? I mean, at the lower school, kind of let kids discover as they get to 4th grade that there's not result in laughter when somebody comes up with a bad idea that they go back. I don't know if that's part of the curriculum.
Yeah, so it's not as much part of the explicit curriculum as it's part of the social emotional work that we do with children. You really need to be explicit with children. So before you begin a brainstorming session, it's, well, what if you hear an idea that sounds silly to you, right? How do you approach that, right? Instead of laughing, what could we do? Could we ask, that person to clarify their idea so that we understand it better, right? Could we take one piece of that idea that we like and build on it? So front loading always, right? When we're looking at these ideas and we want to develop these habits, we're very, very explicit. We don't expect these habits to develop on their own, right? So we say, what does it look like? What does it sound like when we're acting in this way? And it's not always perfect. And sometimes kids come up with silly ideas just to be silly, right? So let me tell you all, the job of a teacher is very difficult because you're always making these calls about, how do I help this child grow in this moment, right? And what's going on in this moment. So it's not easy, and we don't do it perfectly.
I just really appreciate the work that y'all do, and I really saw it this year on 6th grade. It has a big science project, and so I got all nervous because they could go to districts, and how are they going to be competitive? And I was quickly brought back to reality in my conversations with Alexander as he embraced a lot of this thinking that we learned in lower school, and we even talked about the core values and where's responsibility in your project. And so I learned from him and saw everything y'all had laid a foundation for. And it just made me appreciate that he didn't care about winning. He cared about all the other things about his project. So I just think it's amazing what you guys are doing.
All right. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.